What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to CANESCAST. I'm Phil,
Welcome back, everybody, to season two. I'm Garrett, guys.
and we are ready to talk some Canes football. No, we were gone for a little bit, but this kicks off season two, and we're going to get rolling with some content. I'm excited. We are obviously jacked to be back. Football season right around the corner, just a couple weeks away, where we're going to kick off with the Battle of the Miamis. But we're going to talk first about, I want to give a little nod. Last time we were on here, we kind of left off with basketball season. Our boys had a hell of a run making it to the Final Four. Hopefully that continues. And let's be real here, a lot of success in South Florida sports. Panthers making the Stanley Cup final, the Heat making the NBA finals, Dolphins off a playoff run, the Marlins, while a killer first half before the All-Star break, starting to hopefully find round into form, battle for a playoff spot. And then obviously expectations are high again for the Finns. So let's keep that momentum. Oh, and I can't forget Inter Miami, who was just rolling since Messi got there, which is epic. But let's just hope our boys in green and orange can continue that and have a pretty good season this year. I think anything will be better than what we watched last year, but let's get it going in the right direction and have a solid season, and most importantly, beat the teams that we can't stand, right? And we know who those are. So let's get rolling, Garrett. I think you wanted to touch on, before we kind of get into in later episodes, maybe the predictions and things like that, where I think you won't be as intense about what your predictions are as you were last year. But we're going to talk a little bit about what's taken the country by storm, and it's the conference realignment and what that potentially does for us and the ACC and where we could be in that whole situation. So, what are your thoughts on this right now, man?
Well, obviously, the show we started last year was, we're entering into a new age in college football. Well, that means, monumental conference shifts. So the Pac-12 may end up being completely eradicated.
Pack
At
four.
this moment of recording, there's still four teams sitting in the conference. So where are they going to end up? Do a bunch of teams from the Mountain West jump in that conference? Do they stay afloat? Should be interesting to see what still plays out. But what has played out is, all these Southwest teams jumped into the Big 12. USC and UCLA are kind of an anomaly there in California, Southern California, but they're jumping into the Big 10. And then Oregon and Washington, really is what kind of was the final nail in the coffin of the Pac-12, it seems, because their move, to join USC and UCLA as West Coast teams playing in a very big conference, and they have a lot of tradition. But as far as geography, does that really make sense? The USC UCLA thing didn't make sense to begin with, but that's what we're in now. We're in a time and day and age where it's about contracts and money and what can you bring to the table. So the ACC, where are we at now, is the big question, because this is our team. What's in store for us? I think we're going to stay put for now. I don't think we have anywhere near the $300 million, $200 million, whatever it costs at the end of the day to get out of the grant of rights, before 2036 or however long this thing is. It's a long ways down the road. And being in the conference that's really not getting the most money out of, the TV deal is just where we're at. What I foresaw would have been, the ideal situation with the ACC would have been to grab those four remaining Pacific schools, grab UConn, and then I'd say make Notre Dame pick conference. You're either going to be in the Big Ten or the SEC or ACC. You're going to have to pick something, because let's say you got all that to happen for the ACC. In an ideal world, you'd be at 20 teams. I think what's left out there, it shakes out for each team's, conference that's going to end up being around. It's going to be around 20 teams. So that's where I thought we should have moved. Where we end up in this Texas market with SMU, or where it ends up is it's going to be interesting to see. Let's say that would have happened, like I was talking about. That's 20 teams. It's four big conferences. That makes as much square sense as all of this. I thought they could have gotten away with really the SEC Big Ten kind of being the football, Big 12 ACC kind of having more of the basketball power, but really it was four. That sounded about right to me. But so again, that's just what I That's what I think. But that's the fun part about putting this together is it's just, you can spitball. But really, in the next few weeks and throughout the next year, once this ACC deadline comes up on the 15th, I think is if anyone's going to leave in the next year, they have to let notify by the 15th. So then everyone's locked in for another year. So I don't think the ACC will change much, to be honest. I think they'll see it and be a wait and see conference, and maybe I'll fall by the wayside too.
Yeah, I think what it's going to end up costing, I was just looking some stuff up here too, and I think it's going to cost, it would cost FSU, that's the big thing right now, everybody's talking about FSU and Clemson, about 120 million, and it's from what I can see, it would cost Miami about the same. So I think it's 3 times their annual revenue is what it's going to cost them to bounce. So 120 million there. Really, there's a lot being talked about the top 7 teams in the ACC. So as far as the draw ratings wise, is Miami, Clemson, FSU, and this isn't in order. I don't know what the order is off the top of my hand, but the ratings draw Miami, Florida State, Clemson, North Carolina State, and Virginia Tech, I believe. So everything else, if they don't have those schools, they're going to fall by the wayside. And they're big draws. So ultimately, does Miami want to leave the ACC? I think if FSU and Clemson do shell out the money to leave the ACC, which right now I don't think that's going to happen. I do think that that's why those guys voted against what we've talked about off camera a lot of the Cal Stanford thing coming over. They voted against that because I think it's just about money. It's going to make that conference more. They ultimately want to leave. It's going to make it harder for them to leave if they expand the conference. So ultimately, they want to end up in the Big Ten or the SEC because we're trending to 2 huge conferences and everything else falls by the wayside. Miami, regardless, and you and I have talked about this, regardless of how we do, and Florida State is the same. Texas would fall into this category. Any of the really big schools, any of the big names that people know, doesn't matter if they are great or if they suck. People are going to tune in to watch them, so they're going to be draws. So Miami's not going to stay in the ACC if those teams leave, at least not for the long term, because it doesn't benefit them to stay there in a weak conference, a conference that's weakened. If Stanford and Cal come over, if Notre Dame decided to join the conference and it propped it up and it helped it like that, just ratings wise, name wise, the draw, then I could see us staying like we've talked about. But I think leaving the ACC eventually, if it falls apart, is going to be the best thing to do. But if the ACC can stay put with these schools and add a Cal, Stanford, potentially an SMU, we're looking at something that's a whole nother solid, solid squad, a solid conference. Excuse me. It is crazy because everybody's moving around left and right. So I mean, it just feels like the next shoe's going to drop. But I conference realignment, it doesn't make sense, like you've said, geographically. These West Coast schools, does Stanford and Cal belong in the Atlantic Coast Conference? They don't, and they're probably not going to end up there anyway. But everything ultimately just comes down to money. It's just cash flow. Miami brings in a lot of it, and Florida State brings in a lot of it. Clemson brings in a lot of it. So the ACC also has to, with the revenue stuff, they have to appease these guys because they're bringing in the most. I know Florida State feels like they're not getting paid enough. How do you think these schools ultimately would perform and if they went to the SEC or the Big Ten? But the cool thing to me about these things, like we're seeing USC and UCLA move like that, even though it's going to be weird, they're going to dominate time slots because they have the East Coast all the way to the West Coast. So you'll be able to watch, Nebraska play Michigan State at noon. You're going to be able to see, Ohio State play Wisconsin or whatever time, and then you could see Michigan play, in the next time slot at 4, and then all of a sudden you could have a late game with USC playing Michigan. You have huge games, and it's not just a one-off. You're going to see those games all the time. So it's going to really be a gigantic ratings draw. And I would love to see that for us. I think the cool thing about bowl season is it mixes things up. It allows teams that never play each other to play, and it just kind of adds intrigue to that. But when I look at it, I don't think that USC and UCLA are going to go to the Big Ten and win right away. I think it'd be tough for us or these schools to just go in the SEC. It's going to be deeper. But it ultimately would be better for competition, probably having all these big teams in the same conference, all these big names. What it does to the rest, who knows? But me personally, it's going to make it better, I think. But geographically, it's screwed. They got to figure this out a little differently.
Yeah, and that's why we talked before the show, and to me, that's why the ACC should have gone ahead and gobbled up those Pac teams because the Big Ten has teams stretched coast to coast. The Big 12 really does as well. So I don't think the geographic thing outside of the SEC. I think they've got more of the region part of it closer than anybody because they don't go really west of Texas. But Texas and Florida being in the same region isn't. I don't think that's real in geographic terms. But I think the best thing for a Miami team would be to end up in the SEC. If we're going to be big players in football, that's where all the big players in football are ending up. I don't think that will happen ultimately. I think Florida and Florida State will somehow keep us out of that. I guess that's how it's always been, from what I can understand up to this point, why we're not there to begin with, because that would make the most sense, football wise, geographic wise for us to be in. I think we'll stay in the ACC until it either falls apart or expands and sticks around. I think what we talked about again, the most important thing is we need to win this conference. So I know this is not necessarily the year that everyone had us picked out to be the winner of the ACC, and having gone through last year and picked us to be 12-0 and us to be 5-7, I'm not going to pick us to win the ACC this year, but I think it's important that get this conference won. I can't believe we haven't won it. When we joined it way back in the day, I thought it was going to be Miami, Florida State battle for the ACC championship every year, basically. We haven't even, we haven't been in it. So it's been majorly disappointing that we can't hang our hat on at least having, however long this conference is going to be around or we're going to be in it, having dominated it or been at least competitive, because I don't even think we've been either one. So, I really want to win. Let's just hopefully that's this year and next year if we are in this conference that much longer. So hopefully we win some ball games in it and can ride off wherever we're going, at least having done it finally.
Yeah, we need to go out on top. That's for sure. Regardless of what happens, I've talked to you a lot about winning the ACC. Obviously how important that is, and like you said, we figured, yeah, like everybody, would come in and it would just be great. We've had some success in the ACC as far as some seasons. I know it's not Miami standard and it's not what we want to see consistently. We should have been better. I do point out that because of the sanctions that none of us are really thrilled about. And you see where the NCAA is now with the NIL and everything, and things I've talked about, like LSU having boosters arrested for money that went to players and nothing ever came of it. Nothing ever happened. Alabama, Georgia, all these improper benefits that you see on Facebook, Instagram, players posing with cars and things like that they get before this happened. And nothing ever came of anything for them. Um, it's BS and part of our self-imposed sanctions after getting set back for 15 years with all the other every other thing we had to deal with was we took ourselves out of a championship, ACC championship game. And there obviously we know that the NCAA had to back off too as far as trying to find evidence on Miami with, what was it, a bribery thing, trying to get people to come out with evidence against the Canes, which was frustrating. So obviously we're not happy with the way that we've been treated at times. And we could very well have an ACC championship had we not taken ourselves out of that game, which, funny enough, would have been Al Golden, and everybody hates Al Golden. And to me, he was a good coach that got us through some rough times. As far as the way he ran the program, none of this other stuff happened, and we had to stay squeaky clean. Little tangent there. He's gone. He was not a good coach, but helped us through those things. So I will say, yes, seeing Miami win the ACC will be great, but Miami winning the ACC if Florida State and Clemson lose is not going to do it. That's not. It'll still be cool to see. I'm glad if we win it, if Stanford and Cal come over, if Notre Dame, those things can all matter, but it's not going to be what we want to see, and they're going to always find a reason to clown it or try to talk trash. But the bottom line is winning ACC championships are cool, and we need to do it, but that's not the goal. The goal is to win, championships and add to our 5, which already should be 6, but going for 7, but we need to go get our 6. And that's the thing. And we trust in Cristobal to build us in that right direction. and I'm excited to see what he does with the squad here in the second year. I know you're not going to go out and say 12-0 again, like we talked about. That was pretty brass last year, and
I
brash.
mean, I'll just say 12-0 every year. I mean, someday I'll be right.
Someday you'll be right, but I don't know. And it always everything comes down to money. So if a conference feels like it's going to be it's going to benefit them, everything just comes down to money. Why decisions? These teams have the money to travel across the country, absolutely. But if certain
Well,
people
I think
in the
let's
conference
be
don't
clear. I
want it.
think the football programs have the money to travel cross country. It's the other sports that's the real question.
Basketball has success and brings in money, but you're right. As a general rule, the rest of them, there's certain schools that make money from baseball, but generally, even if you're a baseball or basketball school, football is going to bring in a large sum of the money that your school makes, and it dominates, and it lets those other schools travel. Lets those other schools, other sports, excuse me, have the ability to move around and do that. But basketball is, March Madness is the biggest thing in the world, basically. I mean, so when that happens,
But
people go crazy.
but what must be so interesting is this, and I've seen this said, so this isn't the first place to say this, but I agree with it. Basketball doesn't matter in this case. Obviously, you know, basketball carries no weight in the conference realignment world.
Yes, I understand that. People want to wonder, okay, well, what happens to the ACC would do? Like, yes, I've said this with you too. Conference matters more for football than it does for basketball because of the Cinderellas and everything we see. When people really start to care, it's March Madness. I love it. I watch the Canes all season long throughout their basketball season. But when people really get drawn in is March Madness. It's the upsets, it's the brackets. I've never done this in my life, but I have a bracket that's doing really well. Cool, that's awesome. Let's see it. That's such a draw, which is why football will benefit from a larger playoff on some level because football dominates everything. But you're right. If the ACC gets wiped out, and then you look at a team like Duke, who's nowhere anywhere close to being a football in the realm of football thing. Yeah, Duke has wins and they've had great seasons in their history in football, but they're a basketball school and they'll always be. If Duke won the championship in football, they'd still be a basketball school because of how much they've accomplished in basketball. So it's not apples to apples with that, and they'll be fine. If Miami left and then you had that, those schools would still play each other, and it would just be a weird. They'd like mix things up, but Duke. Like teams like that, even North Carolina, even if North Carolina won, they've had a lot more success in football than Duke has. But even if they won, they would still be a basketball school. So to me, you're right. They don't carry this. This thing is not being looked at like, yeah, Miami's had a lot of good seasons in basketball recently. The last decade, multiple Sweet 16s, Elite Eight, Final Four, ACC championships. But that is not playing into it at all. You're absolutely right. Football is going to be the common denominator with what drives this to because that's what brings in the money. I mean, I agree with you on that. Basketball is not going to hold that weight, but it's something that will be broached. The topic will be broached on some level. It just sucks because these other schools that know they don't want to be left in the lurch too. And that's the part that's hard with this is when you look at right now, if the ACC were to stay as it is and you get Wake Forest, if you were to add like Cal, Stanford and things like that, Wake Forest, I'm going to say something about them. If all these big schools leave instead of adding these Cal, Stanford, potentially SMU, what if Notre Dame decided to finally join, which we never think they will? And Florida State and Clemson State, and you're like, oh, cool. And you have this conference that's budding. Then you have something there. But if Clemson, Florida State, Miami, Virginia Tech, North Carolina State, if they left, I mean, what does that do? These schools now I have no future. They were never football powerhouses to begin with. What did they do? They're going to join some smaller conference and hopefully get their crack. They have a good season, and when the playoff expands, they'll have an opportunity to grow their brand and sneak in. But that sucks for them because right now these smaller schools and big conferences have the benefit of like, look at I'm playing in a decent conference and look what I did. So it hurts these smaller schools, but this whole thing is just driven by brand. It's where these brands going to be, and Miami's a brand. Florida State is, Clemson is.
Yeah, I think this whole thing is interesting. I didn't expect it to disintegrate in the shape that it did. But when USC again, UCLA decided to join a conference that stretches all the way to the East Coast, so this is where we are now, and that's why I think the ACC needs to be aggressive and make moves if we're going to sustain and go the right way, or right away. I guess I want to see it stick around more than anything. I don't mind the ACC conference necessarily. I've always really defended it as a football competitive league. So I think it's imperative that they get on board of the absorb as much entities as you can, because at this point it's gobbling up as many recognizable brands, and then can contending for these playoff spots in the end of the day going forward. So four, because it seems to me like the Big 12 is going to stick around. So at this moment, it's not two, it's three. Three doesn't make sense to me. Four makes more sense. So that's where I see it. And
It still is
then
four.
and then really, if they are going to maybe allow the real bottom five, six, maybe the bottom two teams in each conference get cycled out and get dropped down if they don't stay competitive, and then you let some of these other conferences get their or little other teams developing a chance to get in.
So you're
One of the
talking
big,
like overseas with soccer, like European soccer leagues. These teams can drop out,
yeah,
get
yeah,
put back in.
sure,
I think
why
with
not?
this though, dude, you have it's all going to come down to money, and this is not changing.
Because
USC and
it's not
USC.
about it's not about tradition, obviously, because Oklahoma State, and Washington State, Oregon. I mean, these things
They're
are
still
going
going to play.
away in no other form or fashion that we can keep them around. So tradition doesn't mean much.
But they're still going to play though.
What makes sense is keeping things competitive, keeping things interesting. Keeping them slightly evolving. Because then you can't just say iron in these 80 schools and then that's it. What are the other 40, 50, now 60 other teams supposed to do every year? I think, again, that's why I think you can give them a chance to cycle up. If you don't, in these power deals, if you're going to not bring any draw to the conference and you're not keeping things competitive, then we're going to find somebody that will bring, a new brand or a new region in, let them in each every couple of years, maybe every 5 years. I don't know, 4, 2, who knows?
There's just too much money. Honestly, dude, I think what's going to happen is it's those games are still going to happen. Tradition's still going to happen. Oregon State, they're still going to play every year. I mean, look at Florida and Florida State; they play every year. We wish we played Florida every year. Those
For
games will
now,
happen.
for now,
Those
but
conferences are
we
not.
don't know how they're going to come around in the next couple of years with these conferences being to 20 and 18 teams. It'll
No,
be interesting to see.
when I
It'll be
said the
interesting to see.
conferences are going anywhere, they will go. They are going to go somewhere. What I meant by that is these right now they still are the pack, right? So UCLA and USC still play. They're not going until what 2024. And even if Florida State and Clemson, let's say they decided to duck out right now, it's not happening this year, and we know it's not happening next year, so it wouldn't happen until the following year because there's always a year removed. So we're still a couple years away from seeing those teams move just because of the way this works. They wouldn't do it and then just be gone next year. It would wait a year, I would assume, before they would go. And really, it goes back to what I said earlier. These schools, the money that is made from this cross country, all of a sudden you're watching USC play Ohio State and just the name recognition. You watch Oregon play Wisconsin, the name recognition there on either whether it's snowy, but you're watching a game late night. It's 11 o'clock on the East Coast, and it's 8 o'clock on the West Coast, but you're watching these games. That's going to be crazy ratings, and that's going to bring in crazy money. And that's ultimately going to be what everybody talks about. That's going to fill stadiums. That's going to fill seats. It's going to make the conference more competitive. The schedule, less cupcakes in there to pad your stuff. That it's ultimately going to be what it is. And if we see this really kick off here, it's going to force everyone's hand, because that's going to be where we're going to watch it firsthand with the Big Ten first, and how well they do is going to be what sets the course for Florida State and Clemson and Miami and these other schools eventually say, okay, we want out. We really want to go do this because the money's just too ridiculous. That's everything. Everything is money. Everything is money driven. That's where it starts. That's where it ends. It could be good. I understand what you're saying, though. With all these teams, you might lose some of that tradition, but I do think it's important to keep those games. I think they have to keep those games because they're just that's part of it. People are always watching those games. Everyone's going to tune in to watch. I don't know right now, Virginia Tech, but Miami, Florida State, Florida State, Michigan, Ohio State. Now, obviously, that's still going to happen, but Oregon State gets a lot of ratings from people. That's still going to happen. So
Yeah, yeah. So let's say with it having good adequately addressed the conference realignment world, we are still in the old world for now this season. We'll get into what we think of the Canes coming up this year then, right? I don't know that I want to get very bold and take a prediction. I will do a number, but what I really want to say is I going into this year, I'm not even certain that we have the Miami Ohio game in the bag. As far as what I have seen, this is a tough a game as any that we'll play all year long. I think they'll be ready. I think we're going to get their best shot, just like we always do. So, I mean, we're starting off the first of the year. The first game is already a kind of a toss up as far as I'm concerned. I feel good about our team. Don't get me wrong. I am not of the set that says last year's team was no talent. I think that there was talent on the team. I think it fell apart. We know we've covered it. I don't want to see that happen this year, but I won't say it's out of the question. I don't see where when we lose a tough game here and there that it doesn't snowball. Just like seems to keep us in this rut. So I think I'm going to put out a prediction for this year's team 8-4. I think that's where I think this team will end up at the end of the year. But, I think this is a good team. I don't want to say that if they go a better record than that, I will be surprised. I think if we go a worse record than that, it's, going to be super disappointing. But, I think 8-4 is my number. But this schedule sets up well to be competitive. I don't see why we can't be in every game. But again, I think the Miami Ohio game, having watched what happened last year, I'm not just flat out sold we're going to be 1-0 after the first game. What do you think, Phil?
yeah, me personally, I feel a lot better this year. Last year was a lot of uncertainty, and I think I predicted 2-3 losses, something like that. So I was closer than you were, thankfully, I guess, with that bold prediction. But I do think that for us to have a successful season, you got to obviously make a bowl game. Eight wins is the minimum for me. The reason I'm excited, I look at this team is, and I think I have more faith than probably is deserved, is because I saw a team the year before with a lot of talent. Not this last season, but the year before that, right? Even with Diaz, Rhett Lashley, a system that fit Tyler Van Dyke a lot better. Saw him win Rookie of the Year in the ACC overall, Offensive Rookie of the Year, and the overall ACC Rookie of the Year. There was a reason for that. The guy's got talent. The team has talent. Square peg, round hole. That's really what it was last year for me. You had an offensive coordinator that did not mesh with the players. You try to force that in and get that, and it just did not fit what we had. We had a lot of injuries on offense, a lot. But you also had a lot of guys that I think didn't fit the system and really the culture. I talked about the system with the coaching, but the culture that Miami and what Cristobal wanted to do. And I think you get rid of a lot of those guys and you bring in guys that fit that culture, guys that stayed because they believe in that culture, guys that are returning from injury, guys that got a lot of reps last year because of the injury. So just on the surface, we're a deeper squad from that. And having Shannon at defensive or an offensive coordinator, is going to be huge because it's running a much better, a much closer resemblance to what Rhett Lashley ran for Tyler Van Dyke. I'm expecting a much bigger year, and I really think that the offensive line this year can be really good. We know the history of development with Cristobal in the offensive line, and let's be real, second year as a coach in places, he has done a really good job. FIU did a lot better in their first year, and they were void of talent when he took over at coach. And then Oregon, their second year, they really started to get things rolling. I mean, he had things built in the right direction there, multiple top 5 draft picks, Rose Bowl wins, Pac-12 championships. I mean, we know he can coach, and this means more to him than anything, being at his alma mater. I think there is a real case to be made that we could start 5-0. You're right. When I'm tired of being shocked. I think nothing would surprise us. But I think right now we opened up as 18-point favorites. I just was looking at our first game today. We're 18-point favorites. That'll fluctuate before game time. But I have a little more confidence. I'm not saying we're going to go win, but oddly, from the changes we've made, it's cool. To me, you got to see it, and you know there's talent on this team. You got to see it and say, man, this just didn't work. And it was very obvious what didn't work. That got removed. You move new things in. Players, big time transfers, the offensive line with Cohen and Matt Lee, going to be huge. Again, I'm not going to sit here and say undefeated, but 9 wins to me is something that we can get. If you have a season, I will say this: if you have a season close to what you had last year, um, Cristobal being the legend in Miami that he is, and he bleeds the colors, champion and everything else, he'll get a longer leash than some. But if he has another season like that, the seat will really heat up, and it's like 3 strikes, you're out. If he has a better season, then okay, we start seeing it kind of roll. But it just is telling that those first 5 games could see us have the same amount of wins as we did last year. It really could. The big ones that you look at and say that for sure, oh, that's right now the way Florida State's trending and Clemson. Those are the games you say we should lose, but those are the games we obviously want to win. But we know it. There's going to be a letdown game that we lose that we have no business losing. I just don't want it to be to the small squads in the beginning. I'm comfortable saying I think we can get to 9 wins legitimately. I think that 7 wins is your absolute floor. Ceiling, we could get to double digits, but anything below 7 wins, so flipping that record from last year, unacceptable. But I think with the talent on the squad, knowing that we have the best safety in the country, the best safety duo in the country, one of the best defensive linemen in the country, one of the top, why on paper, offensive line and defensive line in the country. We had more preseason all ACC picks and on the first team all ACC picks than anybody in the ACC, more than all the other schools. 8 total when you include special teams. There's a reason for that. We got a lot of talent. It's time to start.
I would definitely agree that you can't win any less than 7 games,
Yeah,
and not expect you're on the hot seat for job replacement again and blowing this thing up again, which would be devastating. It
6
would be the
wins.
last thing I really want to happen. But if you only win 6 games and you go 6-6, I just don't see that being good enough.
You're bowl eligible, and that's improvement.
So like
But
7-6, if you win that bowl game, like, and you have something positive to go in the end of the season, maybe. But again, I still think the seat would be hot. I think you justifiably, if you lose 6 games this year after losing 7 last year, I don't see you're making a lot of progress for this fan base. And I think what happens is, and really, let's just go back and it's evident in who shows up, and it's very evident with the fan base in Miami that when they stop showing up, then you know that it's time to find somebody new. Because every year they'll, get a new coach. People will be excited. Things will go well for a minute. Things might look good, and then all of a sudden they stop losing, and the fan base just goes, in the toilet, and nobody shows up at the games, and then that's where they have blown this thing up. That's been 5 times now since we've been having a successful program. 5 head coaches now.
Yeah,
so
I think that whole thing about 6 wins, absolutely, you cannot have that. I think it depends on the way it happens, right? If you're showing improvement, like if we were to come out of the gate slow, and all of a sudden we're 2-4, and then you end strong and you end 6-6, and then you win a bowl game, that shows improvement, right? If it falls apart, starts hot, falls apart. If it starts hot and you win 7 games, but then it falls apart the rest of the way, doesn't look good, but that's that 7-game floor. So it's all subjective to how it takes place too. It really is. How are you starting? How are you finishing? All of that matters big time. And that's just something we have to wait and see as the season plays out. But
hey man, let's just say I am excited for college football to be back. We're filming this with preseason games, of the NFL. So it's football's back. That feels good either way.
Yeah, it does for sure. I'm excited for it. We're excited to be back. Excited to be back, breaking down games, having discussions, talking about what we saw, what we're expecting in each game coming up. And yeah, it's exciting time. Football's back. It's the best time of the year. Fall's here. And as always, guys, go Canes.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Share with your friends, like and subscribe. Uh, keep us uh, keep us busy here. We want to keep these shows coming out to you. So tell your friends about CANESCAST, guys. Thanks for tuning in.
All about the you.
How about you, baby?